G'day guys, I'm Totally Zoo and welcome back to Wirradale Zoo. So today we're going to be picking right up from where we left off and starting with our pronghorn habitats to complete the double habitat with the bison. And as you might guess, that's going to involve a fair amount of copying and pasting. So we're going to get underway with the basics for that. And because I want to avoid being too repetitive, we will be looking at some of the other areas of the zoo that need a bit of touching up and working on those as well today. So if you missed the last week's video, the concept behind this double habitat is that we'll be rotating between the bison and the pronghorn in each habitat, which will allow the grass in the pronghorn habitat to regrow a little bit because the pronghorn don't tend to eat grass as much as the bison. The fundamental reason behind that being that I want some part of the life on the prairie section of the zoo to actually look like the prairie might. So as you can see, we've been copying and pasting details across from the bison habitat. The whole point of this is to be pretty similar between the two, given that this is a double habitat. So in my opinion, there is a bit of an art to copying and pasting well. You want to be able to recognize which areas should be straight up copied and pasted and which things should be tweaked slightly and which ones you should change in large ways. So for example, it's going to be very hard to notice if you have copied and pasted a section of forest between two habitats unless potentially they're directly side by side. So with that, it's pretty easy to copy and paste. So here's an example of something that I'm forced to change. Because we've got pathing directly next to barriers, we have to just work with what the game is going to let us do and then move the rocks around that to make it look good. So one thing that is almost always worth tweaking is the positions of your viewing galleries. So the ones from the top here, I want to keep together so that we can sort of have an overlook of the whole prairie from the top. But these two viewing galleries down the bottom here, I want them to be in two different positions to allow us to have a bit of a varied viewing point, as well as importantly easing with the crowd congestion, because the crowds are pretty good at getting stuck against each other in this game, so we want to give them a bit of space between each other. Now if you're wondering how to get this squared path, you want to place that tiny little bit of offshoot on the path there and then select grid based off that tiny offshoot, and then you can place the square down there. So while we're talking about the values of copying and pasting, I figured we'd get into today's building tip, which will focus on some of the tricks that will save you a lot of time during that process. So each of these tricks probably only saves you a second or two at a time, but as you build large scale zoos, you'll be using these non-stop and it will save you a lot of time in the long run. So the simplest trick that we've got for copy and paste is the Control D, which will duplicate whatever item you're holding, and you can just move it around and place it. So a really useful trick for Control D is if we have our random rotation toggled on, I can copy this plant and it's going to rotate those slightly, which is going to make it look a lot more natural. Now the next step up from that is probably usually only used for things like rocks, but if I Control D with random rotation all toggled on, that's going to rotate it in all three axes and you end up with rocks all over the place that don't even really look like they're from the same original rock. So the next trick we're going to look at is the Control X option, which is going to copy it, automatically put you into the advanced move option, which is going to just save you having to press X every time that you copy. And also if I press Control D, we've got our random rotation on, but if we take that off, it's a little hard to make sure that this is perfectly aligned the way I want it to. So if I press Control X, it's definitely going to be perfectly aligned there. One of the next tricks, which is probably something a lot of people know about, but this shortcut probably isn't, is angle snap. We can toggle that on, and that's going to mean we can move in 45-degree increments or 30 or 15, and that's really good if I want to add a perfect 90-degree angle here, but you might not want to click that every single time. So the trick that you've got is pressing space, and that will toggle your angle snap on or off, so you can bend it to a angle that you want it to, and then if I want to grab this whole thing and copy it again, I can turn my angle snap back on, and maybe I want to have whatever this structure is. I don't know, but maybe that's what I was trying to do in the first place. So that's a really handy trick. Now let's say I regret that. We all know we can press Control Z to undo it, but you might not know that you can press Control Y and that will bring it back. So certainly I know I've lost a bit of time myself to accidentally undoing something and then having to rebuild it. So once I figured out Control Y was there, that has saved me a whole lot of headache. Now, one other thing that we've got that is always really useful for this type of thing is pressing I, and that's going to activate your group select, and then I can grab a couple of these and I don't want them, and maybe I can trim those ones across and maybe those ones. And then if I just say actually no, the whole thing's bad, I can select it, or I can grab it and move it around, but maybe I'll just say let's get rid of those. So those are some of the tricks that can really save you a lot of time in the long run. It was a bit of a longer building tip for today, but hopefully some of those have helped you out, and we can get straight back to the building. So as far as things that are really straightforward to copy and paste, anything that's backstage, generally speaking, it's not going to really be noticeable that you've copied and pasted it. And anyone who does isn't going to worry too much. You want your appearance of the habitat itself to look good. The surrounding backstage areas aren't as big of a concern. Now, since I have grid pieces within the barn there, I had to create a blueprint and copy and paste it that way. And as anticipated with the last one, the pronghorn can actually fit inside of this, unlike the bison. So some of the bedding and whatnot in the back is actually going to be used this time. Now, before we put the pronghorn in the habitat, we've had a bit of a baby boom at Wirradale Zoo. So the adorable coyote puppies are playing around. I love their little baby howls that they do. We also have the baby Galapagos tortoise, and I've never seen these in real life, but I would love to be able to see some of these guys wandering about. They look so good. So ignore the janky animation there, but this is our little baby red panda. That's mum going by. And as soon as the little baby there sees the crowd, she turns around and wants to go back to see mum. So who can't relate to that? So one of the cutest ones is the little baby prairie dogs. Now the prairie dogs themselves are quite small, but the babies are absolutely miniature. I love this little clip here of this one just wandering up towards the viewing window and having a look around. The bison have already had a baby, and this time I'm relating to the parents there, but the little baby looks adorable. I love this view from where the guests would be seeing him. So this is moments after the birth of our little baby pair David's deer in the backstage area for them. The deer looks adorable, and for a species that is extinct in the wild, this would be huge for the zoo. Now, my personal favorite one is the little baby pangolin. The pangolins are so adorable, and their plight in the wild in real life is absolutely heartbreaking. And so the thought that the zoo would be able to breed these guys and potentially release them back into the wild, or potentially give them to other zoos to help contribute to the breeding program, would be really cool, and I imagine would be one of Wirradale Zoo's crowning achievements in terms of conservation. And speaking of which, this would be a massive moment for any zoo. Wirradale Zoo have successfully bred our pandas, and just this animation looks so cool. The little cub is so cute. I love it. And as you can see in the background, the dad is still accessing the area. Maybe this wouldn't happen, but we'll keep that between you and me, okay? So as we go back to the more mundane world of just building, this entrance area has been bothering me for a little while, so it's time to add a little bit of life around there. So starting off with the first step for that, which is adding a path lining across the way. So the style of path that we use here looks great, but it really doesn't blend well with the terrain that is on the sides of it. And the default curves that they have available generally aren't up to the standard that I'm looking for. They tend to be either a bit too big, or they can even be a bit glitchy at times where you can see partially through them. So having your own custom ones can add a little bit of life that is otherwise missing. So I decided to copy across the scrub that we've got for the side of the North America section. This was designed to be native looking, with the appearance that it's more or less allowed to grow as it would naturally, with just a little bit of touching up by the zoo. As you can see, we've already got the glass in the zoo HQ and the exit area, so we can't cover it up too much with scrub. So just having some basic level of plant life that might obscure some of the view, but not all of it, is the goal here. So once we had a somewhat decent appearance there, I just grouped it all up and copied it across. And now it's time to touch things up and fill in the gaps that are there and remove the parts that are overflowing onto the path. And the idea with this was to have a few of these animal statues hidden inside the scrub. This would largely be done for kids who would love to be able to look around and try to spot the animals from the path, and it also just adds a little bit more of that life and reality that we want in the zoo. And in the end, I really like the view inside and outside of the zoo HQ, and these small things really do go a long way. And while I was in the area, I decided to do a little bit of detail work in the coyote habitat. I don't want to do any major overhaulings of past habitats, but little bits of detail here and there I think is pretty appropriate. So this was super satisfying last time, so I want to include some of this detail again with this episode. While I'm doing it, I'd like to talk a little bit about the change in the editing process that we worked on last episode and we are continuing here. So obviously I only have the one data point, but the rendering has gone down from about 2 hours for an 18-minute video to about 3 minutes. So I don't know what it was about the heavy time lapse that was doing it, but something was absolutely destroying my computer. So I'm very glad that I've managed to address that. And in general, I've had, I would say, a fairly positive response to this change. I've also found it a lot easier on my end to include the detail that I want, as well as making sure that I don't spend too much time doing repetitive stuff. So while this episode is by its nature going to be relatively repetitive, it's given me the opportunity to spend a bit more time exploring other parts of the zoo and looking at how the zoo itself has been developing. But this is a skill that I'm still developing, so I'm still very much open to all feedback regarding that. So please do let me know if you've got any thoughts. And here we go, just lowering that grass into position. That is always so satisfying to see. We're throwing in that second layer here and just separating it into its own group before using our Control D and just pasting it everywhere we can. If you really want to go the extra mile, you can do 2, 3, 4 layers of this grass just to blend things in, but generally speaking 2 gets the job done. And again, so satisfying to see as this lowers down into position. So I proceeded to play a bit with the layering of the grass, and now that the grass layers are in the right position relative to each other, we can just adjust both of them as a group together and get the height that I want. So the habitat information boards that I've been making have gone through a few different iterations so far. The current iteration involves a little bit more information. So originally I wanted these to be really easy to make, but I actually really love making them. So I've just added these extra layers, which just gives a little information about the location, the size, and just one little fun fact about each species. And we'll see the pronghorns properly at the end, but here's a shot because we also got a baby pronghorn. So the babies are left, right and center at Wirradale at the moment, which is really cool to see. So while we're working on fixing up areas in the zoo that aren't completed yet, we're going to do this area at the Encountered China section, which I'd never quite finished. This is the backstage access for the staff to access behind to the paired Evers deer and the pangolin habitat. So the first thing we're going to do is block off the guest view of that area, which is just going to involve a whole lot of bamboo and also the tropical leaf litter on the ground. And this is the perfect spot for us to have a bit of a staff recreation area. So any staff who are on their break want to come out under the tree and have a bit of a rest can go out to this area, which is going to really make sure that the guests can't see it for that reason. You don't want your staff to have guests yelling at them while they're on their break, so we'll just add an extra layer of bamboo here to block that off. And you can't place these benches without paths, so we're just going to place in a island of path that is not accessible and put the bench there where the staff could sit to eat their lunch or to read a book or just to hang out while they're on their break. So this was something I wanted to add in, just like these desire paths, so you can see that the staff have maybe been cutting the corner there on the edge of the path, and this is where they've been entering into this little backstage area that they can chill out in. So as we add some final details, we'll jump into our cinematics shortly. Once again, I'd like to say a huge thank you for anyone who watched the video today. If you do enjoy these videos, I'm making them every week, so consider subscribing. And either way, thank you very much for watching. Have a good one.